Chief White and Chief Wolf, if you want to turn your cameras on. There we are. Welcome, welcome. Let me pin you both. Add pin. All right, Chief White and Chief Wolf, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
There we go.
Well, without further ado, I will turn the floor to you, and I'm here to help listen and answer questions and feed questions from the audience. So, floor is yours.
Sounds good. On behalf of I'm Brad White. I'm with Grand Fire Protection District in Northern Rockies of Colorado, and with me today is David Wolf. He's the fire chief over in Estes Valley on the other side of the Continental Divide there from me. And in behalf of us, thank you for the opportunity to chat with you guys today and tell you a little bit about our experience. Kevin originally reached out and asked if we would talk today, and I think we both jumped at the opportunity to fly to Hawaii and wondered what it was that two small agencies in the Northern Rockies could teach fire departments in the Pacific there. But spent some time with Chief Ventura, and I think we found some similarities and also some differences to capitalize on. And so we'll give you a little intro on ourselves, and then tell you a little bit about our experiences here in 2020 and some of the things we've learned from it. So again, there's hopefully many of you are familiar with Colorado. My agency, Grand Fire, is in the center of Grand County on the west side of the Continental Divide, and David is over in the Estes Valley on the east side of the divide, east side of Rocky Mountain National Park, that red blob between us. Go ahead there, David. So I'm coming up on 20 years in the fire service here next spring, and but I've served in some leadership roles since early in my career. First in a volunteer agency, and then over at my current agency at Grand Fire as a combo agency. I've spent some time with Colorado State Fire Chiefs as the Wildland Section Chair, and I've served on several of our Division of Fire Prevention Control, our state agency, a number of working groups with them, just kind of working towards our solutions to our wildland problem here in the state, which like many parts of the West is just a growing issue for us. My agency is one of the older ones in the area. We started in 1934. We cover about 152 square miles. If you see the map there, we're kind of the yellow square in the middle. Little different model here in Colorado than what I'm hearing about Hawaii. We do a lot of what we call fire protection districts. A lot of fire departments are either municipal, they're part of the town. We got some nonprofits, but a vast majority of them are these fire protection districts. So we're kind of our own level of government, somewhere between county and town. So in my case, we surround the town of Granby, but we go quite a ways outside of that. So we've got covered a total 152 square miles of pretty varied terrain, honestly. We've got 2 stations and a third one in the works. We're a combo agency. I've only got 5 career staff at the moment, and the rest is all volunteers that work their butt off in seasons like 2020. We're a tourist area. We're full-time population here is not very big. It's about 5,000-6,000 people in the district, but we often have 30,000 to 40,000 visitors in the area. And just to the north of me is Grand Lake Fire Protection District, and they border right up against the national park, and their numbers are quite a bit higher than that sometimes. And to the south of me is East Grand Fire, and they've got the Winter Park ski area down there. So we got summer tourism and winter tourism. A lot of public lands around us. We've got 2 national forests. We got Bureau of Land Management. Talked about the national park, and I've got a national recreation area that's part of my district. And on top of that, something probably you don't see much in Hawaii, but we do a lot of what's called trans-basin water diversion. So our community provides a lot of water for the highly populated area of what we call the Front Range of Colorado. And that's, Colorado Springs, Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, that whole area. We probably last little comment for me is about 2004, 2005, we experienced this pine beetle epidemic that came through, and we suffered about an 85% mortality on our lodgepole pine forest. So we've been dealing with the aftermath of that since then. Go ahead, David.
Again, I want to echo Brad's comments. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. My name is David Wolf. I'm the fire chief in Estes. I've been in the fire service since 2000. I've been fortunate to bounce around to a few different locations. So I've been in Pennsylvania, New York, Texas, and for the last 5 years, been the fire chief here in Colorado. I'm also on the UL's Firefighter Safety Rescue, Firefighter Research Institute's technical panel for the search and rescue study that's going on right now. And serve as the combination volunteer section chair for Colorado State Chiefs. Estes Fire, we've been around since 1907, similar to what Brad was describing. We're a fire protection district, so we cover 70 square miles and includes a municipality and unincorporated county. We run that out of 2 stations with 7 full-time staff and 40 volunteers. So of our full-time staff, the plurality is focused on fire prevention and then admin and then just a couple of ops. Our population also varies significantly from day to day and season to season. We don't have the winter tourism that they do, but we'll go from 12,000 full-time population up to 90,000 on a busy summer day. And as was mentioned, to the west of us, we have Rocky Mountain National Park. We've got a lot of national forest around us, Bureau of Reclamation land, Department of Interior land around us. And then our nearest career department is about an hour response time for mutual aid. And so the main things we want to share with you today and sort of the take home piece, so if everyone zones out for the next 45 minutes and misses all the conversation, is that we're really preparing ourselves as fire chiefs, as battalion chiefs, as firefighters, everybody through the ranks. At some point, we're going to be tested in our career, and the career test is coming. We don't know what's on the test. We don't know when it's going to happen. But we want to make sure we set up our agencies for success when those do happen. And the key takeaways we want to share is that how prior planning can help with those things, being able to do a really critical self-assessment of your own agency, and we're going to talk about these in detail, understanding your role and the limitations of your role or the limitations of your agency becomes really important. And we're going to emphasize the relationships, not just between other fire agencies, between our fire agencies and all of those in our community that can be integral during a major incident. And so we'll talk through some of those, and next Brad will share a little bit about what happened in 2020 and what we're looking at.
So we're all still living in COVID world, but I think COVID in Colorado in the spring kind of set us up for how the rest of the year was going to go. And obviously a lot of stress in the community, a lot of stress among the firefighters. And then obviously COVID really wasn't solved yet. And we moved into this fire season of 2020. And, spring, summer, not too bad, but we started getting into late July and into August. And we had fires on the west slope really start picking up. Pine Gulch was a large one. Grizzly Creek is still having after effects on I-70 through the mountain corridor there. Middle Fork Fire, just goes on and on. A couple fires over in the Boulder area. David was dealing with the Cameron Peak fire to the north of him, which turned out to be the largest fire in Colorado State history. For us here in Grand County, August 14th, the Williams Fork fire started just to the west of my district. And then by about October 14th, Lee's Troublesome started up. And so all our resources, in the state were stretched pretty thin, but the same thing was happening throughout the West, pretty aggressive season, the Pacific Northwest and California, all that. So pretty much the firefighters we had is what we had last year. So for us, East Troublesome fires, as I mentioned, began on October 14th. And right out of the gate, it started up in an area that was full of dead and dying lodgepole pine. And then we've got this kind of new undergrowth coming up underneath it. And started in a hot, dry, windy summer. We had record low fuel moistures and high temps and just a windy fall. And first couple of days was 3,000 acres, 4,000 acres. So you can see on this map that shaded blue area is really the origin of the fire. And, you look at that and the various shades of blue there were really that first week. And then all of a sudden on October 21st, and by the way, we had an incident management team, a type 2 team here that came for the Williams Fork fire and ended up taking over this fire as it started. And they were struggling trying to get a new team in. But the 21st was transition day to a type 1 team. And you can kind of see some of those yellow to orange streaks. And the evening of the 21st, we went from really about 32,000 acres at 4 o'clock. And by 7, 8 o'clock that evening, we were, well into the 130,000 acres. So over 100,000 acres here in one evening. This perimeter you can see is really about 37 miles from the heel to the head of the fire over on David's side, and about 20 miles wide. So go ahead, David. So in case you're wondering, here's what a mega fire looks like in your neighborhood from an aircraft. Go ahead. So as I said, we've been plucking away at this fire for a week. We knew it was going to make some miles at some point. We did not think it would be nearly as aggressive as it was. So we had quite a few areas under either pre-evacuation, or we had some residents evacuated for a week, kind of along the south edge of the fire. And we were having good discussions the evening of the 21st on, hey, let's be proactive, and we're going to start some more evacuations 9 o'clock in the morning along the Highway 34 corridor, which runs along the national recreation area there, Lake Granby and Shadow Mountain. But here's a snapshot of what those evacuation plans looked like. We had over 380 square miles in evacuation and another 45 square miles ready for pre-evac that next morning. And 3 fire districts there, National Park, and then ultimately over into David's district on the other side of the Continental Divide. Through this blow up, we shut down 2 of our economic centers, which was a challenge, the town of Grand Lake. But my town here in Granby is just where a lot of retail and services happen. And suddenly when you're looking for some gasoline and stuff like that, it got really tricky. Over $160 million worth of damage, 160 million in lost property, another 100 million in damage, which I was surprised how much damage comes with the fire and the homes that are still there. And what I learned here just a few weeks ago is $32 million in damage to the watershed for that transbasin diversion.
On the other side of the divide in Larimer County, the primary fire that had been our focus had been the Cameron Peak fire. Started back in mid-August. Those are the purple areas on the map. Kind of skunked around 500,000, 10,000 acres for the first couple of months, first couple of weeks. And then around Labor Day weekend, we had our first big blow up. And again, each color is one day. So over Labor Day weekend, we had a 25,000 acre growth day, followed by a 40,000 acre growth day. And then we had a brief window where we had a gap because we had snow that fell right around Labor Day weekend, slowed the fire down. Took the fire about a month to get going again, but then it kicked out on the south side there. And that's when we added that orange lobe in mid-October. So now this fire has been going for 2 full months. And we watched this fire work its way south, 40,000 acres, 15,000 acres, 15,000 acres, as we headed down towards Estes and our districts here on the south. We were really focused on that northern fire when, as Brad mentioned, the East Troublesome fire jumped over the Continental Divide, and that is what triggered all of our evacuations. So we had about 40,000 people impacted over the duration of the fire, and about 30 to 35,000 of those was evacuations in Estes Park when the East Troublesome fire came over the divide. One of the big things on this fire was how long it was. Multiple months of people evacuated from their homes, displaced, and dealing with the same incident on top of things like COVID. This is a time lapse of what that fire looked like as it was working its way down around Labor Day weekend, down towards Estes. And then these are some images from the evacuations. The picture on top is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on October 22nd. So all of the smoke cloud, all of the embers that were coming over from the west side made the sky look like that in 2 in the afternoon. The bottom image is Granby, that's Brad's district, as it was getting evacuated the day before. And if there's anything positive that comes out of images like this, it's that when you tell people to leave and the sky is orange at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, no one argues with you. Everyone loads up and they get in their car and they go. And we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about what that evacuation looked like and some of the details. But it went a lot faster than we anticipated, and the amount of time that we had to manage these evacuations was considerably shorter than anybody had planned. Arrow's not working. There we go.
So David mentioned early on that, you know, these are career challenging events. These are bigger events than obviously any of us had ever seen prior. You know, for us, 5 fire departments in the county here, and between all of us, we're maybe 120 firefighters. We began a few years ago just really trying to reach out to our neighboring counties, and we built a kind of a mutual aid response system, you know, just for these events. But, you know, every one of us as officers and as chiefs have spent a career, you know, educating ourselves and learning new things and going to classes. And really, this is the test where you put it all together. What have you really learned, and what have you done with what you've learned? And you know, these events, they overwhelm the system, and you've got no control over how this test is going to go, or when it's going to happen, or who all's involved with it. You just got to prepare yourself and your agency, knowing that a test like this is coming at some point. You know, so obviously there's some things that, you know, again, every chief's been through, you know, thousands of hours of training and classes. So there's some things that, you know, before the event that are going to be challenging. You know, they're obvious things that we need to be working on all the time. And so whether it's keeping up on training and equipment for your folks, or whether it's digging in and really building some relationships with your community and your neighboring organizations. And, you know, some of the organizations that maybe aren't fire or EMS or law, you know, how are they going to be able to help you when that big event comes? You know, things we learned in the middle of the battle. David and my experiences were similar in a lot of ways, but a little different too. You know, we both went through this large fire event. We both evacuated large areas. In my area, we lost over 500 and some structures, most of that in the first few hours of that big push on the evening of the 21st. And fortunately for David, he was able to get his citizens back in after a few days, and most everybody had a home still. For me, I'm one of very few chiefs in Colorado, maybe one of the only active ones, that literally watched 500 homes burn up in the area, and had to still figure out how we're going to protect the next 3,500 that were still there. So you really just got to pick yourself up out of the basement and look at what's going around, and start with some basic problems you can solve quickly and easily, and build on those successes as you go. You just really got to balance the needs. And, you know, I think I mentioned this to David early on. Friends just came out of the woodwork, you know, folks that you've known for a long time and just didn't really think had a part in fighting wildland fire. And all of a sudden they're hitting you with a text or they're showing up at your command post. Hey, what can I do? I can do, you know, I can't go fight fire, but tell me what I can do for you. And you just gotta divvy out some responsibility and trust them at that point in time, because whatever they can do is going to be better than you trying to do it all on your own. So again, you know, just start with those little successes and build on them.
And as I mentioned earlier, it's really critical to do an agency assessment and be critical in that agency assessment. I just make sure you understand what your agency is competent with, where you're capable, and where you need to get help. And one of the big things for our conversations had to do with the depth in our agencies. It's easy to say, okay, yeah, I've got somebody who can do EOC operations and be incident command or be incident operations, but do I have enough people when all of those roles need to be filled at the same time? And making sure that you have the depth necessary within your command structure. And if you don't, making sure that you're spending those time to invest in your people to get them there. And thinking about the timelines and what's a realistic timeline to address these deficiencies. You're not going to solve all of these by the end of this calendar year, maybe not even by next fire season, but starting to do the work now so that you're prepared for that when it does happen. We spent a lot of time planning based on previous incidents. So starting back in 2017, 2018, looking at some of the big incidents that had happened that were in comparable communities and use that to help build our plans. And I've always loved this quote about that plans themselves are useless, but planning is indispensable. It's really valuable to go through those conversations, have the discussions with your peers, your fellow responders, other agency or community members, identifying what those weak points are. And as we've both hit on a couple of times, those relationships outside of the fire service, our county relationships, our municipal relationships, our non-governmental organization relationships, so that when we need them, they're there. And I think one of the biggest things that came out in the after action of these incidents is that while we had done some extensive planning, at no point were we pessimistic enough in our planning. We thought the worst case scenario that we would come up with was significantly better than what actually happened. And we joke about how if we had presented this scenario in an actual leadership class, everyone would have laughed at us and said, that's totally implausible, that will never happen. And yet that was the reality we were dealing with. And be prepared for the generosity that you're going to see from your community when these things happen. You're going to need to help coordinating volunteers and people who want to dedicate their time or their resources, and making sure that you know how you can use them and where you can use them, because your agency will be overwhelmed. We utilized a lot of agencies to help us with coordinating donations, sorting those into donations that went to businesses, donations to civilians, or donations that went to firefighters, coordinating suppliers, a lot of the logistical things that if logistics will win and lose battles. And this is a big one to be thinking about ahead of time, because those things are going to come out of the woodwork, and you're going to need to have a plan. You can only use so much jerky at a certain point in an incident.
So, as an officer in the agency or a chief, how are you going to stay relevant during this huge incident? I think in our area, we're all relatively small agencies. All the fire chiefs are pretty much operational. You'll see us on a traffic accident. You'll see us at a structure fire, certainly at a wildland fire, oftentimes in a command post role, but we're still there and involved. And suddenly your whole world is changed, and you can't be everywhere at once. So you need to prioritize where is it that you're going to be most effective. And it's not always with your folks. I think this is one of the first incident. This is the first and probably only incident I've really felt like, I can't do anything for my people here. I really need to focus on some other stuff. And so, to ensure that your folks are prepared to step up and take a little bigger role than maybe they do on a day-to-day basis, and they've got that training and they've got that forward look, is really important. My place pretty quickly became an intermediate between this huge incident management team that was here, but largely ineffective for what we needed in the subdivisions, and our group of, about 170 firefighters that we brought in to supplement, and all the activity they had going on. So, you almost need to consider yourself as that agency administrator role and get plugged in, find all the places you need to get plugged in, because it's more than one. So capitalizing on public interest, there's that saying, don't let any disaster go to waste, right? We often for years took advantage of other people's disasters and tried to drum up, interest in getting some wildland mitigation done, getting them registered with Code Red, Reverse 911, and all those sorts of things. We did some good work prior to the fire season on having some language all plugged into our Reverse 911 system, but it turns out it was sort of ineffective because it was a much larger scale than we had anticipated. So, work with your public, make sure they know where to go find information ahead of time. And after these incidents, again, really dial in and work with them on, hey, that didn't turn out very well for 500 and some folks. Let's make sure the rest of the county is in good shape and prepared, and we're going to do our part as the fire district and work with the federal agencies and do what we can do to get some good fuel breaks and things like that in. But Mr. Homeowner, what we saw is this huge clump of cinder rolling through the neighborhoods, catching stuff on fire. So what are you going to do to keep your house from doing that? So just capitalize on that public interest while you have it.
And we know this problem is not going away. We've been watching the frequency and the scale of these large fires increase in Colorado. We see it across the country. We know that global warming is driving a lot of this, and that we see that 2020 was its own fire year. And so as we are thinking about whether or not that was an anomaly and we can, okay, great, we're past that, or we're going to see more of this, we anticipate that there's going to be more of these types of challenges for us as we move forward in our own careers. And while I would hope that that was my career challenging event, I also suspect I've got enough years left that I might get another one. So in summary, and we're excited to open this up for questions, we know we're preparing our agency for the career test. We don't know when that test is going to happen. We don't know exactly what's going to be on it, but there are things that we can do to set our agencies up for success, to set ourselves up for success, to make sure that we're able to best serve our citizens when that incident happens. Our contact info is here. We're on for a while answering questions, and so really excited to have some conversation about it.
Chief White and Chief Wolf, awesome presentation. And it's crazy to see what happened in the East Troublesome fire, and also knowing that there were other fires even this year that were larger in scale than that, which is crazy to see considering the scope of this. But I think now I want to try and provide some additional context for the Hawaii landscape, and then see what some other best practices we can use. And I got 2 questions in the chat. That's great. But one that I wanted to ask was some ideas around pre-incident planning. You alluded to some of this, but what are some sort of ideas around best practices that could be replicated, that were some pre-incident activities that helped you get through these events? One thing you said I liked, it's usually, I'm a very optimistic guy, but sometimes I liked what you said of actually being pessimistic is maybe a good strategy. But what are some of these other pre-incident activities that you now are going to do, or that you prepared for, that might be applied in Hawaii?
Yeah, so the first thing that we did up in the Estes area was, as I mentioned, take some of those large events that had happened in comparable communities, some in California, some in Tennessee, all over the country, and then essentially did a tabletop exercise with our fire leadership in this area, National Park, National Forest, Sheriff's Office, all having the conversation about, how would we handle an incident like that? We've never had something like that happen here. What are our priorities? And that helped us realize that protecting our radio infrastructure, protecting our hospitals so that we can manage evacuations, and then simply traffic management plans were the biggest priorities. And that gave us action items to work on before our next incident. So we were able to start prioritizing those things out and coming up with that plan. And I said, if I had the time machine and was able to go back in those conversations, I think we did a great job of planning the first 12 to 24 hours of the incident. I would have made sure that we planned 72 to 96 hours of the incident. It's like, okay, we've managed to deal with the first wave. We still have 150 first responders, and we've evacuated all our restaurants and grocery stores. How are we going to feed them? How are we going to take care of those people? How are we going to interface with our electricity providers and our gas providers, and some of those other conversations that came up later that I would have done earlier in the planning process.
Chief White?
Yeah, pretty much exactly what David's alluding to. I wouldn't discount just the power of conversation either. Without pulling together a big tabletop, without pulling together a huge training, as you said, in our area, I try to keep a good relationship with the police chief and the sheriff, and in our area, EMS is a separate run organization. And, we a couple of years ago found out just through conversation that, hey, as we're all doing our training, we all assume these other agencies are taking care of that evacuation. But those agencies all felt like, hey, our time is going to be really busy, and we assume this other agency is going to take care of that. And so just through meetings and conversation, we've been able to identify some gaps as we talk through things and make some changes.
So we've gotten some great questions here in the chat. We'll start with Eric Johnson's question. Interoperability of radio communication between the agencies in Hawaii is a challenge with escalating large wildland fires. How can we prepare and overcome?
We've been experiencing some of the same challenges because all of our local municipal departments, fire districts have all moved to 800 megahertz, while our federal partners have stayed on VHF. I think, short of everybody being on the same radio channel, which is obviously ideal, at least making sure that where you have those bridges between, say, your federal partners and your local agencies, that you have both radio systems and that ability. So as a task force leader or as a strike team leader, I can talk with my incident management team, who's probably on VHF, and I can communicate with my people on 800. And so that was a big piece for us, is making sure that we had those those bridges between our local resources and our federal resources.
Yeah, I know what we deal with. We deal with the exact same thing, the state system versus the federal VHF system over here, but a little more complicated for us. We've got 5 federal agencies we coordinate with, and the next county over, they add 2 more federal agencies. And so we just try real hard every spring. A lot of those federal agencies update their comm plans, and we just try to keep an updated bank for each one of those organizations. And we just look at it that we're going to be adaptable to whatever we're going into. And then usually within a day or two, we kind of come up with a, second day of the fire, second day of the incident. Oftentimes there's a good incident comm plan. We've spent about $85,000 in the last 5 years just transitioning over to the Bendix King radios that, are field programmable. That finally kind of became our solution to a lot of that. But as David said, we still have that challenge with those state radio system. And we just have, myself and the neighboring agencies have sort of developed a little cache of extra radios. And we just start handing those out at the command post to the people who need them, not to everybody. We don't want to confuse the system. But, when you got an incident management team in working, hey, Mr. Ops Chief guy, take this radio and leave it on this channel and listen to it for the next couple of days. And that was actually pretty helpful.
Thanks, Chiefs. All right, next question we got from Robert Westerman. When a Type 1 team comes in, how do you handle the many political positions from such a large fire in many municipalities?
Think about that question here a little bit. So one of our takeaways after this, we did, as David said, did a lot of after action stuff. So one of the things we're working on right now is just the Welcome to Grand County handbook that we intend to hand off to teams. It's got all the players in it. We'll keep it updated. It's got our comm plans in it. It's got our maps in it and all the digital links so that, they can pull in what they need and the layers they need. So that's an ongoing process. We're not there yet, but I think that's going to be a great solution for us. And it'll have those political entities that they need to know. And, hey, here's the mayor, here's the town manager in these areas. And that's kind of our starting point. And I'd add this too, the teams we had in our area were all very accommodating. And, as fire chief, I just kind of kept, when the action was slow, I just kind of kept swinging into the command post and just getting the update. And after, a day or two, most of those players knew who I was and felt good calling me for things. And it worked out fairly smooth up until transition day where you had a brand new team in that you had no relationship with.
Chief Wolf, anything else to add there?
No, I think Brad really hit it. It's relationships ahead of time and having those relationships with those people before the fire happens. You understand each other's priorities, and that's going to set you up for success.
Communication and relationships are key.
Mm-hmm.
So another question from Lou. What are some things that we can pass along to property owners to protect their property before an incident occurs?
Yeah, I shared a little bit in the chat. In Estes, we've been pushing the International Association of Fire Chiefs Ready, Set, Go program pretty heavily. We've tailored a lot of that stuff to our local, our community and marketing. We also talk about NFPA's FireWise programs. Those are all resources that we can push out, self-assessment checklists. There's some great stuff that's already put together for us by NFPA and IAFC, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's where we've really started.
I think one of the challenges we've had since the fire is, we had this, big blast, this big firewall. And, there didn't matter what you put in front of that. I went through and figured it out. We had about a 45% loss in that, in that disaster zone there. And then from there, the fire spread out. And one of the things we got a little pushback, a little challenge from some of our community members was, well, it doesn't matter. I know so-and-so and they did a lot of work and it didn't help. Well, that's true for that's relatively small area where the main blast of the fire went through. But as that fire spread, we had a lot of success in there working with homes that had been doing mitigation work and had been working on defensible space. And, we just have to know in this era of mega fires, we're not going to be able to save every home, but anything those homeowners can do is going to benefit them. And 90% of the time, it's going to work in their favor.
And Chief, I saw that you answered the Darwin Okinawa's question, but I'll just say it out loud and then maybe you can
Yeah.
emphasize it again. But this question is, I noticed on your map, it appeared that you folks evacuated districts, many with areas away from the fire. How do you determine the specific area that will be evacuated?
Yeah, so what I mentioned in there is from models that we had built years ago to watching the fire behavior in 2020, it really comes down to time. How long do you think it will take until the fire reaches a certain point, and how long do you think it will take to evacuate an area? It's interesting, Brad and I both had different or the same number in our head from different calculations, and what we found from our experiences this year is that we could evacuate between 1,000 to 1,200 people per hour per lane of travel. So if we had, we contraflowed down a road and that made it 2 lanes versus there's 3 ways in and out of town. That is what determined how much time it would take to get people out of the way. And then it all was based on how long do we think we have until the fire got here. We had lines on our map for Cameron Peak working its way south. And by the time East Troublesome jumped over, it jumped over in such a place that it was already across 3 of the lines, and that made for our a much more chaotic evacuation than we would have liked. But we don't get to control those things, so it was based on that kind of math.
Yeah, and for us, one of the things we got bid on a little bit is as we looked at our evacuation zones ahead of time, we sort of looked at what's our capacity, what sort of area can our law enforcement evacuate at a time, and we tried to build that into operations, knowing that, hey, there's 3 potential operation areas out here that are going to need evacuation, and they're going to need this much time, so we need to pull the trigger that early. And of course, in this sort of an incident, this blow up, all that was out the window. So we've sort of redone our evacuation areas here in the county, and we've started with these what we're calling a larger alert area. And so when we get that 911 call for a smoke report, and we start heading out there, and we're like, oh, that's a big column. We're going to start alerting larger areas first, and then we've got a choice. We can either evacuate that large area, or we can break it down into smaller, more manageable to do it door to door. But again, our new philosophy is start big and then work down to reality, what you need that day.
And I think something that relates to a lot of the agencies in Hawaii is, we both deal with a lot of tourists, a lot of guests in our communities that are not familiar with the risks in our area and are not as familiar with our area. So some of our evacuation timelines are based on that. I might have a different timeline if it was all locals who I knew were paying attention versus one of those days when I have 80,000 people in town and 70,000 of them have no idea what the risk is. And so having different evacuation models, I think is really important.
I always find that one of the biggest areas for improvement is with the human capital, the human operation himself or herself. And it seems like what you just mentioned, the tourist part for both Colorado and Hawaii is a common theme. What is being done, or what could be done better in regards to better educating outsiders or tourists in regards to fire safety practices or fire safety evacuation practices?
So
go ahead, Brad.
We got a couple things we're trying now. In my area, we are a 70% vacancy on our homes, which means 30% of them are occupied by the owner. The other 70% are occupied by somebody else, whether it's a long-term tenant or what we really see is these short-term rentals. And so it's a weekly, if not more often, turnover of who's in those units. And so we're working with a couple of our subdivisions, our homeowners associations, and we're working on what we're calling a tear sheet, just a pad of pre-printed paper. And each resident, their cleaners can go in and say, hey, we're going to fill it out. You're in evacuation zone G12 or whatever it is. And here's where you're going to go, here's a QR code. You can go get information. Here's another QR code on if there's an active incident where you're going to get information. And here are the areas that we'd like you to head towards. And so it's going to be a little different for each part of the subdivision, or different subdivisions are going to have different things, but at least we're going to try to get that information there. And what goes right with that is, in our area, we're more commonly in fire restrictions throughout the summer. And we do a stage 1, which is pretty much eliminating, we're eliminating anything that's not a 3x3 on private ground. And in stage 2, we're just eliminating all open flame that's not controlled by gas. And so trying to educate those people coming in and out on what the local rules are. Right now that's kind of our best solution, but also working with those HOAs on some other, when somebody checks in, they can get an email from the fire department saying, hey, here's what you need to know about staying in this area.
And we've tried to be similarly aggressive in our educational approach. We want to reach out to these people that are visiting, let them know about the risks. But I think when we talk about community risk reduction, we have to not just think about the education piece, but the engineering piece. And that is more at the community level, designing our communities to be safer. And what makes a hotel safer than a short-term rental is that it's built to different standards. It's designed to be interacted with by someone who doesn't understand that space. So we are looking at things like not allowing any Class A combustibles outside of a short-term rental, so that it eliminates the opportunity for somebody to do something unsafe. And of course, there's only so far we can go with that, but I think it's if we rely solely on education, that the millions of people that come through our community every year, we get on average 4.5 million visitors a year through our community. I can't assume that most of them know what they're encountering and that they understand the risk, no matter how much outreach I do. And so I hope that the spaces they interact with can be safer. And that's really where we're trying to approach it, at a comprehensive planning level for our town and our valley, more than through just restrictions and education.
Well said. There was a comment here from Richard Kawasaki, and this may be a statement that may lead to a comment back from you. They said one of their biggest challenges with our firing operations is we do not have the acreage to give up to successfully get in front of a fast-moving brush fire. Not quite a question, but any thoughts in regards to that statement?
No, that's certainly a challenge. And that was where, as we've been having these conversations about our planning and our zones around here, about where we can draw those polygons to say we want to exclude fire from these areas, as we build more and more into the wildland urban interface, that buffer zone goes away. And now we can't do burning ops without having homes inside the box that we're trying to burn. And that's where having that education with our homeowners and our property owners becomes so key, is letting them know that, if a fire is in this box, there's not a whole lot we can do to stop it to get from getting to your house. And therefore there's a little bit more personal responsibility in what kind of prep you do around your house, which doesn't mean we're just going to fire off and burn their house down, but that we don't have those options. And so we've been talking about how to be a little bit more blunt and forward with our citizens about really understanding what their risks are and what we as an agency can and cannot do to prevent their home from being impacted by fire.
So, one of our successes, if you will, in East Troublesome, we had this big blow up on the 21st, but the 22nd, we had another wind event. The wind shifted some and was threatening another couple of subdivisions. And same thing, there was still 55, 60 mile an hour winds midday there. And you're right, we couldn't get in front of the fire and do a safe backburn or burnout operation. But one of the things that I think our fire department, fire district firefighters were better at than some of the federal agencies that we're in was just ringing the homes in front of the fire and dropping some fire on the ground around the homes in a controlled manner so that we don't have decks on fire and things like that. Rather than trying to stop that flame front, just really blackening the ground around the homes or around the subdivision, shortly before it gets there. And our folks saved quite a few homes with that method.
Hey,
it feels a little risky.
Yeah. Kevin, I was hoping Chief Ventura might be able to come on and speak a little bit to his comment that he put in the chat, because that sounds like a fascinating system that'd be great to hear more about.
If Chief, you can jump in here. I saw the comment you had. If you are available right now, let's see, you just came on mute. Great. Going through a little tech here. No worries.
Can you hear me, Kevin?
I can hear you. I can't see you, but that's okay.
That's good for now. So this is a device that we have locally that we use in Maui County, an ICRI. And basically, it's a way we can bridge a variety of radio channels together. So when we have private companies come and help us with our brush fires and our wildfires, we're able to bridge several different companies onto our fire channels. And then we put them on usually 2 different channels so that, it doesn't clutter the command channel, but then the dozers will be on a channel, maybe the water tankers will be on a channel, and then, firing will be on a different channel, and operations and the IC will be on a separate channel. But it allows us to communicate, at least locally, amongst our small group of people that we have here.
That sounds like a great solution to addressing that comms piece.
So thanks, Chief. Got a bunch of chiefs here, which is great. So one other thing that I've been thinking about personally, and I love all things tech. Been actively involved in a lot of different things with virtual reality, wearables. But one of the biggest uses of tech that has been widely adopted recently, I'll say widely, but more and more first responders are adopting them, are drones. There's both quadcopters and fixed wings, and in just a lot of different use cases of how these drones can be used for situational awareness, eye in the sky, different types of asset delivery, and using different cameras and sensors to give situational awareness to ultimately create actionable insights for firefighters. Wildland firefighting obviously creates such a unique challenge, but I just wanted to know from you, are drones something that you're using, or drones anything that you're thinking about, and where do you see the future of drones within wildland firefighting operations going?
So I think drones have a big future. While our agency doesn't own one, our sheriff has one, has a couple actually. And typically when we get a working wildland fire, especially near a subdivision, that thing's up in the air pretty quick. It's got thermal imaging. And one of the strengths we found is actually pairing it. Colorado has what they call a multi-mission aircraft that will fly your fire when they're available. You can order it, request it, they'll fly it, they'll get you the thermal imaging. One of the things they can do is give you GPS hotspots, things like that. And we've had success on a couple of fires now, kind of that evening or the next day, taking that imagery from the state and feeding those coordinates in with the sheriff's deputy and the drone. And, you're talking small little embers that the state plane's picking up. And when you're hunting through the subdivision and wood piles and landscaping and stuff, it can be a little tricky. And we've been able to fly that thing and zero right in. And we've got some great thermal video of firefighters walking within 2 feet of some of these embers, and the drone being able to stop them, turn them back. Let's get that handled before it blows up in the, between the houses later in the afternoon. So, just one use, there's a lot of good uses. One of the challenges obviously is similar to aircraft that, we've got certain conditions we can use them and certain conditions we can't. And for our blow up on the East Troublesome and the heavy winds we've got, we really weren't able to fly aircraft for about 2 days. And, same with the drone. The sheriff's deputy tried once and it was up and it was off and he put it away pretty quick. So.
Chief Wolf, have you similar feedback or any comments in regards to technology or drones in general?
Yeah, the MMA in Colorado has been a huge resource for us. It found a lot of fires that we didn't even know about because of lightning strikes or campfires that had escaped. With drones, we've had mixed luck. With Cameron Peak, we were trying to fly so many air resources that drones actually became a hindrance, and they were grounding because they weren't drones controlled by us. They were drones that citizens were putting up, and because they wanted to know what was going on, and that was making it so that we were unable to fly our aircraft. We did end up using some drones and both quadcopters and fixed wing drones to survey the fire at various times with the incident management team, which was immensely helpful and also pretty cool because you don't get to fly drones in national parks very often. So that was a neat experience and provided some really valuable insight, but of course it just had to be coordinated with the air show that was going on.
Yeah.
The overall incident.
So one last question before we have a final comment from you both. I guess ask you about drone technology. Is there any other technology that you see as some opportunity for some exponential gains in terms of operations or firefighter safety or property safety? I mentioned drones, but anything else that you're thinking about or excited about in regards to how tech can help wildland firefighting operations?
I think there's a lot of stuff on the horizon. State of Colorado, as part of their program, runs what they call a center of excellence that is looking at a lot of different things, and not everything shakes out to something useful. But There's a lot of situational awareness tools I think are getting ready to roll out into, at least the Colorado Fire Force, where you hand somebody, just tuck them in their backpack and you're able to track where they're at and what's going on. And so as you get intel back, you've got more solid data where the fire is at. I think one of the things, and I think it's back to drone related, but, I'm starting to hear, one of the problems with fire modeling is that there's so many variables out in the field, right? Whether it's fuel conditions, fuel moisture, slope, all that stuff. And so some good discussion going on in Colorado on how can we pull in a lot of data quickly, current data today, feed it into the modeling and get it back out into something useful. And so, I think when they start looking at LiDAR and sounds like they're feel like they're on the brink to successfully measuring fuel moisture from a drone and things like that. I think there's a lot of good things that we're going to see here in the next 5 to 10 years.
And I think I'd add on that. I think there's some great technology that are making homes safer that are built on the wildland urban interface. But it's not always the cheapest option. So some of that has to be driven by code adoptions and good planning by communities to make sure that sort of thing is integrated in. Detection information that helps us find these fires when they're small, because we are really good at containing small fires, and catching them before they become big is always the preferred strategy. So I think from a technology standpoint, those would be the two big things I'm excited about.
Thanks for those hot takes. So final 60-second or less challenge, question, or insight to the audience that you want to leave with everyone today.
Yeah, I think I'd throw out two things. One is build those relationships, go out, have those conversations with not only your neighboring fire agencies, but all of your government partners, all of your non-government partners that could be part of a large incident, so that you have those relationships before something big happens. And take some time to be really critical about your own agency and what your risks are. And as I mentioned in the presentation, be pessimistic about it. Try and imagine how bad it really could be, so that you've done some planning, so that when something does happen, it's not as big a deal, because that, okay, our system's overwhelmed, but we know what to do because we've already spent some time thinking about it. I think those are the two most valuable takeaways I'd encourage.
Chief Wolf and I spent a lot of time together, so ours are pretty much the same. I would just add, David mentioned partners. Broaden up what your partner is. Do you spend any time with, for instance, the water district, whoever's providing the water or the sewer services? Do you spend any time with the utility companies? Because those are really going to be your partners on that bad day, and they're going to take a lot of load off of you. And if you've got those relationships ahead of time, and they know that you're not going to let them into an active scene until it's safe for them, they're going to stand by and wait instead of just gun that, hey, we got to get in there, let us in there. And just broaden your perspective of what a partner is or who a partner could be, and make sure you're building those relationships early.
Chief Wolf and Chief White, thank you so much for your insights and participation today. I put your LinkedIn's into the chat, so make sure to everyone to connect with them on behalf of HFCA and Darley, everyone. Thank you for your leadership and everything that you're doing here. So.